Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to jump in and look at some of the core content that I carry in my bug out bag or get home bag, 72-hour kit, whatever you may want to call it. But we're going to break it down primarily by the philosophy of threes. So let's jump in. Alright guys, welcome back. As I said, in this video, we're going to jump in and look at some of the core content and or gear and things that I carry in my bug out bag, get home bag, or 72-hour kit. Now you'll notice I call it a couple different things, and that's really because this to me is a bag that becomes a multi-purpose bag based on my scenario or the situation. If I'm at home, it may become my bug out bag. If I'm traveling a farther distance and I throw it in the back of my truck or my trunk, then it becomes more of my get home bag. So the 72-hour kit, of course, is really the idea that the contents and things that I carry should be able to allow me to survive and sustain myself for approximately 72 hours. Okay, so that's where you get those ideas. So don't get so wrapped around what you call the bag as much as it is what's the content and things that you feel like you need for your particular scenario. Now, ultimately, it should help us survive for a minimum of 72 hours, right? Approximately 3 days. But even as we've seen in recent environments or recent situations that have happened over the last several years, that 3 days really may not be enough. So again, you might see and add additional things to this that would allow you to survive or maintain what you need for even up to a week. And that's where, as you'll notice in some of my other videos, I touch on the idea of having a bag, bins, or buckets as well as options. Okay, so I'll post a link to that video that you can go refer back to that as what some of those options might be. Now, as we jump in, first and foremost, I did mention we're going to break this down primarily by what we refer to as the philosophy of threes. And if you're not familiar with that philosophy, the idea is that that means there are things that are going to fall under what's 3 minutes, there's things that fall under 3 hours, things that fall under 3 days, and then 3 weeks is kind of that last compartment. So those are kind of the 4 main areas we'll touch on in some of the areas and items that I carry. And then based on time, we'll see, I may jump in and throw some other things that I consider more of my comfort items. Again, as I'm noticing I get a little bit older, I like to be a little more comfortable. But again, they're not necessities when it comes to a survival situation in some situations, okay? Now, the other thing I will bring up before we jump into those is the idea that there is no perfect bag for everyone. What these are is more ideas and concepts to consider for you as you start putting together your bag or kits, so that as you think about your environment based on weather, based on your family situation, all those, these are more just ideas and things to consider. But I will, as always, post links down below to some of the gear that I am going to show and talk about here, so that you can have options to be able to go pick up some of that gear, and then we'll touch on and I'll link other videos in reference to some of this information. All right, so let's jump into the first category of 3 minutes. And really what 3 minutes is referring to a situation where if we can't breathe, whether it be something obstructing our air pipe and things like that, or if we've fallen into icy water and it now is restricting our airflow, or if we're in a major bleeding situation, right, where we've had a major cut in our femoral artery or things like that, where we've got to address it quickly. So we can only last 3 minutes in one of those major first aid situations. And that's really what the 3 minutes touches on, is we should have some basic first aid items and then some other key first aid items to help in some of those major situations, okay? So let's touch on that for just a minute. So first off, in our first aid kit, I'm not going to go into detail in this one, but really you should have some type of a basic first aid kit, right? This is going to be sometimes what we may call more of a boo-boo kit. It's going to have just your Band-Aids, your ointments, some bandages, things like that. That's going to take care of 90% of your scrapes, scratches, and bumps and bruises, those kind of things. Okay, so always, first and foremost, you should have some type of a first aid kit in your bug out bag. Now, also you want to have some of these things a little more readily available, so when you put it in your bag, you want to keep it somewhere more towards the outside or somewhere you can access quickly in those needed situations. Okay, you don't want to be digging through your bag to be able to get to your first aid kit. So that's one thing, is just some basic first aid kit. And again, I'll link a video that will show you some more ideas about building your first aid kits and some things you might want to do there. Now, outside of just a basic first aid kit, there are some other key things that we want to consider. Because when it really comes down to that 3 minutes, there are going to be some other things. Now, I'm going to just touch on a few that I carry. One is, first and foremost, it's going to be a tourniquet. Again, if there's somebody that's bleeding out and you need a tourniquet to be able to stop that bleeding quickly, tourniquets are going to be one of those things that can save somebody's life, because again, if they are losing a lot of blood. Now, this is something you have to be, again, aware of and cautious of. And one of the things I would always recommend is looking for opportunities to go get first aid training to be able to use some of this gear and equipment as well. Okay, along with those, I do carry some medical shears. So these are one of my favorites. I think these are the Raptors. So medical shears to be able to cut away things if needed, right? Cutting seat belts away from people if they've been in a car accident, things like that. So there's some options there. And then one of the other ones that I do carry is these hyphen vents. Now, these are primarily going to be more from a gunshot wound type of situation, where you've got an entry and an exit wound that you've got a vent to be able to protect and provide first aid. Now, again, without going into detail, again, I would encourage you to look for opportunities to go get some first aid training and opportunities how to use this equipment as well. Okay, so that really touches on the 3-minute rule, or the philosophy of the 3 minutes, is really your basic first aid. You should have some first aid items available in your kit, and you need to have those items available, accessible in an easy way, right? Somewhere close on the outside of your bag. And this is where a lot of times you'll also hear people refer to where they may carry what's referred to as an IFAK, or an individual first aid kit. And that IFAK kit, you can find them all over Amazon. There's lots of different options out there. But again, I'll put some links to some of the ones that I would recommend looking at and considering. But these are kits that you can either supplement and add into your bug out bag or carry with you in your car, or you can buy these things individually and start building up that IFAK kit or your first aid kit in your bug out bag as well. Okay, so those trauma kits or first aid kits are some of the key things when it comes to your 3 minutes, or philosophy of that first 3 minutes. Okay guys, so the second one we're going to jump into is the 3 hours, right? So the philosophy of 3 hours. And what that really touches on is the idea that we can only last 3 hours when it comes to inclement weather or something to be able to help control our body temperatures, okay? Especially our core body temperature. And that's really what the 3 hours is. If we get into a situation where we're trapped in our car, where we've got a snowstorm, things like that, then we want to have some type of options to be able to help us in controlling our body temperature, our core body temperature. So as we talk about that, one of the phrases or one of the terms used a lot of times is shelter. Okay, so if you hear from a survival perspective, it may be referred to as a shelter. And shelter could be lots of different things, but first and foremost, your shelter really starts with what are you wearing, right? What's your core things that you have on first and foremost? If you're in a snowy or a cold environment, you want to have options to be able to either have in your car or on you, right? You don't want to leave the house walking out in a t-shirt and shorts if you know it's going to be a blizzard outside. So first and foremost is going to be clothes. So in my 72-hour kit, my bug out bag, I always carry an extra pair of clothes, and that's going to be an extra pair of pants. It's going to be an extra t-shirt and or long sleeve shirt. It's going to be an extra pair of underwear, things like that, that I can change clothes, especially if I get wet in what I'm wearing previously, or I want to have a pair of comfortable clothes to be able to do what I need to if I'm out at work and things like that. Oftentimes I may be more in kind of a dress type of outfit or more of a casual dress outfit. So that's not gonna be real comfortable if I've got to walk home for several miles. So I always want to have a pair of clothes, a change of clothes, or an option for clothing as kind of my first core base for that shelter. From there, I'll have socks in there, but I may also carry an extra pair of socks. And that extra pair of socks, again, is usually going to be some type of a wool sock or a hiking sock, something that's a little bit better than just kind of my inexpensive socks. And that's, again, going to help protect my feet, things like that based on the weather, and or if I've got to do long distance walking, things like that. Now another thing is to consider is a hat, right? I'll keep a hat clipped onto my bag usually. That just protects me from the sun. It creates an option for me to be able to keep the warmth in the top of my head, right? Because we lose a lot of our body heat through our head as well. So having a cap or some type of a ball cap or things, even having a bandana is one thing I'll always carry in my bug out bag for lots of reasons, right? A cotton bandana can be used for lots of different things, from first aid to fire starting to, again, using it as a skull cap or something like that to keep your head warm. Now, I'll also, a lot of times I'll carry a beanie in my bag. Depending on the time of year, I'll throw a lightweight beanie on more so that'll be in there. If it's colder weather, then I might throw a thicker beanie in there as an option. So beanies are, again, something to be able to keep your head warm, and that type of environment becomes part of that cover as well. Now, one of the other things that's, as many of you may know, right, from a shelter perspective, a lot of times what's been traditionally known for years has been this kind of Mylar bag or the space blanket, those kind of things. Now, this is a first option. I would say that these are great as a minimum. But most of these, as many of you may or may not know, these are fairly flimsy, right? So they'll tear, they'll pull apart easily if you start using them. So it's great to have that as an option. If that's all you've got, great, that's better than nothing. But the next thing I would suggest is more popular now today is going to be things like a emergency bivvy sack. So this is your emergency, this is a S.O.L emergency bivvy. Again, I'll place links to a lot of this gear as we go throughout the video. But the S.O.L emergency bivvy is one that I like. It's basically like a personal sleeping bag, but very lightweight, very manageable when it comes to putting it in a backpack and those kind of things. And it's going to reflect your body heat so that from a core perspective, it's going to help maintain some of that body along with your clothes and other things that you've got. Now, those are some of the key things when it comes to just clothing and your base layer for keeping you warm. Now, I've also, a lot of times I'll keep a jacket or something in my trunk or my truck so that I've always got some type of an outer jacket and or coat that I can have or throw on if I need to based on the weather as well. Okay, so those are some key things there. Now, as we dive directly into more of a shelter situation, when we think shelter, a lot of times we now start to think of more like tarps and those kind of ideas. So in my bag, I also like to carry one of these. This is a surplus military poncho. And this is going to give me kind of, again, a core thing that I can use for building a shelter. It's going to protect me from the rain and the elements. Again, it's not huge. I can use it to wrap around me as long as I've got my bivvy sack. I can use that as kind of my inner sack, and this becomes my waterproofing more so in a lot of cases. But this is one of the things I like to have in my bug out bag is some type of a tarp or some type of a shelter that I can use to protect me from the elements, whether it be sun, rain, snow, those kind of things. Because even having something just from a sun perspective, as I live more in the desert environment, having somewhere that I can put up and have just some shade is also another important area, even in the summertime. I don't have to worry so much about the rain, but I still want to have some shade to protect me from the sun in some scenarios. So with that, one of the other things that we'll often put in my bags, and always have in my bags, I should say, is a trash bag. So these are going to be more of your contractor's trash bag. So it's a heavier mill, thicker bag that's going to be able to allow and provide a little more durability. But this I can use for so many different things. I can use it for a poncho if I need to. I can use it to build a shelter if I need to. I can stuff debris in it and use it for a mattress to be able to sleep on to get myself off the ground and keep that core body temperature. So a trash bag can be used for so many different things that I would almost carry 2 trash bags before I start putting in some other gear, because there's so many options that the trash bag will help from a survival perspective. Okay, but with having the trash bag, the S.O.L bivvy. Now again, there's lots of emergency bivvy sacks out there. So again, I'll put some links to options out there depending on what you want to spend and some options that are available now in the market for different companies. Now, one of the other things I'll just mention briefly as part of that outer core is gloves. I always want to carry some type of a glove with me. Most of the cases I'm always carrying some type of a leather glove or a work glove more so, and that's just because I want to protect my hands. When it comes to a survival scenario, having your hands be protected from being cut or those kind of things is important as well. Your hands are going to be so useful when it comes to a survival or an emergency situation. So having some work gloves to be able to protect your hands is going to be important as well. And then again, based on the weather and the environment, you may throw a thin pair of either warmer gloves or even a thicker pair of gloves in your backpack or your bag, depending on your particular environment. Okay, so that's really touching on the 3-hour perspective. Some of the key items to consider as you start thinking about how do I control my core body temperature with shelter items. One of the other key things that I'll mention in this area is the ability to start fires. Okay, now having some type of options for fire starters is key when it comes to be able to control your core body temperature as well. So I'm going to show you, so I've got a couple items here. So this is just a little bag or sack that I've picked up or had for other things. But inside this little bag, I've got several options for how to start fires. I've got some char cloth that I've got. As you can see, I just dumped out there. I've got cotton balls that I can use. I've got stormproof matches. So this is just kind of a fire starting kit that I've put together in my bag. You again can put together your kit, and we'll cover this in some separate videos about options for fire starting. But I always like to have several options when it comes to fire starting. There's lots of things that I carry that are more redundant, right? And the ability to create fire is an important one when it comes to a survival scenario. So I've got different lighters that I'll carry. I've got a Bic lighter in this kit. I've got more of a windproof lighter. I've got even the flint and steel type of ferro rods. So the ability to control your core body temperature, as I said, that philosophy touches on the idea that we can only last 3 hours if we can't help control our body temperature. Okay, so that's that philosophy of 3 hours. Okay guys, so the next area we're going to jump into is 3 days when we talk about that philosophy of threes. And 3 days really is touching on the idea that we can only last 3 days without purified drinking water. So with that, I always like to carry several options of how to be able to either purify, to filter, and or boil and clean water. Okay? So let me show you a couple ideas of what I have. I've been carrying this one in my bag for years, and this is from Shelf Reliance. This is just a bottle water filter that literally has the filter built in directly to the drinking apparatus. So this is your filter. All I do is fill this up with water. I go put the cap on, and then I can drink directly from it, and it's got the built-in filter. Now there's several things that are out there that you can use similar to this. I know that I've seen some other ideas out there that are more of what's considered like the press, where you would fill the outside container with water and then you press the inside container that filters it into the middle of that container for drinking, and the filter is built into that press. And I'll put some links down below for some of those options. One of the other ones that I would recommend having in somewhere in your kit is one of the Sawyer filters. Now there's a couple different versions out there. This happens to be the Sawyer Mini, and this comes, usually the kits are going to run you about 30 bucks or so, so not too terrible from a price point, and it's going to give you several different options. It's going to give you the water filter, it's going to give you usually one of these squeezable bags, it's going to give you a back flush type of syringe, things like that. And we'll do a further video on this and kind of talk about some of the ideas of how to use it and or some options to swap out bags and things that will give you further capabilities. But I always like to have a water filter from Sawyer in my backpack or my bag, because Sawyer creates some great water filters for use in an emergency situation. And these filters, I think, say they can last up to anywhere to like 100,000 gallons. And so those are a great option as a Sawyer water filter. Now, the other thing that I'll talk about is the idea of having some type of a container. So this in my background that's my metal container. This is a stainless steel container that I will keep in my backpack as well. And that container is it's not vacuum sealed, it's not double walled, any of those kind of things. It's a single wall stainless steel container that allows me the option to be able to get water in and boil water on an open fire. Okay, if you use one of the vacuum sealed containers, it's going to ruin the container and it's really not going to work the way you think it is. So having a single walled stainless steel container is going to be one of your best options when it comes to carrying a way to be able to boil some type of water. Okay, so that's one of the things that I would also recommend having in your bag, is some type of a stainless steel container that you can use to boil water and or cook with, depending on what you want to cook and how you want to carry it. Now, one of the last things I'll touch on when it comes to how to get water is, if you're going to be more of an urban environment, or a way to be able to access water through some larger, office buildings or schools, a lot of times those buildings will have the tap feature disabled, where you can't turn on the tap with just turning on the spigot. So one of the things that I always also like to carry is this Silcock key. This Silcock key is going to give me options and opportunities to be able to use to turn on those type of water spigots in different types of buildings. And so this is just a 4-way Silcock key. Again, I'll put a link in Amazon that you can find these on there pretty easily. And I would recommend taking one of those or putting one of those in your bag as well, so that if you are in an environment where you need to procure water and you're around buildings that don't have access or don't have a way to turn it on easily, the Silcock key may be one of the key things to have as well. Okay. One last one I will mention in here, also I have the water tablets, and these water purification tablets is another backup option that I can put water in a container, put the tablet in the container, and it usually has to sit for 30 minutes, and that will help purify the water. It's not going to get rid of all the taste and some of the gunk that's in there, but it's going to purify it so that it's going to help you so where you can drink it. One of the things you can use is a filter, a pre-filter in some cases. I'll refer back to my cotton bandana. This can be used for so many different things. I always recommend having some type of a cotton bandana in your bug out bag or get home bag or 72-hour kit. Okay, so that kind of covers your 3 days scenario, that you always want to have some options as far as a way to filter, purify, and or boil water. That's one of the key things you always want to have. Okay guys, so as we jump into the last section here, we've covered, again, 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, and now we're going to touch on more of 3 weeks. And this is where we start to extend out the capabilities of our 72-hour kit, specifically when it comes to food options, right? How do we put calories back in our body to be able to do what we need to do to sustain ourselves for a little bit longer period of time? Most of these things we've talked about are going to allow us to keep our core body temperature, those kind of things, and this is going to allow us to continue to move forward physically when our body's burning those calories from a survival perspective. So first and foremost, from a 72-hour kit, a lot of times I'll carry just kind of a bag of some minimal things that are not going to expire from a short time frame or long time frame, and that's going to be more like this. So in the background you can see this is my little Ziploc bag there behind me, and that's going to have things like some trail mix, some bars, things that are easily accessible and things that I can eat on a normal basis, right? It could be granola bars, things that you can eat easily, and especially when it comes to your scenario. Now, some of the things that I put in my bag may not be the same things I'm going to put in my kids' bag, because they may not eat the same things that I like or will eat in a survival scenario. Now, again, you do what's needed based on your particular scenario for you and your family, and you've got to consider those things when putting your bag together. Some other options that you can consider is some of like these foil packs. So these are your chicken or tuna foil packs. These are great because they provide a little bit of liquid, but they also provide some protein, some calories for your body to use and burn based on what you're going to need to survive and sustain for a little bit longer. Other options to be able to pick up several of these smaller packets of beef jerky, things like that. Because again, they're going to give you options for protein and or some calories to be able to put back into your body. One of my favorites I use for backpacking or hiking as well is just the Payday. Okay, so I like to buy the mini Paydays. It gives me some calories. These are approximately about 160 calories for a bar. And I like Paydays because it gives me, again, peanuts. It gives me some protein. It gives me some salt. It gives me some sugars. All those things that our body likes as when it comes to physically actually exerting ourselves, having the salts, the sugars, the proteins, things that are going to give us option. And again, when I live in a desert environment, this is going to give me an option. I don't have to worry about the chocolate melting, those kind of things. It's going to get soft, but it's not going to melt like a chocolate bar, like a Snickers, those kind of things. So Paydays is one of my kind of go-tos. But again, you've got to consider what's best for you. If you've got allergies, peanut allergies in your family or those around you, those are things you've got to consider. So the idea behind the 3 weeks is, can I get just some basic snacks that will last me potentially for 72 hours or a week? And then can I add additional things that might give me more sustainability, and or some of the other things that I'll consider and may put in my bag or put in my bin or my bucket, as we'll talk about in the other videos about options for adding on to my kit. Then I might put other things in there that are going to be more like your Mountain House or your freeze-dried meals, things that you can cook over an open flame. You can use other things to be able to create actual meals out of those freeze-dried or dehydrated type of meals as well. So options to consider when it comes to looking at how are you going to sustain yourself from a longer perspective when it comes to food and calories. Now, as I mentioned also in that area is thinking about what are things that you might be able to carry with you in your bag or with you on your kit that's going to give you capabilities long term. And that may be things to consider like firearms or archery type of things that you could procure food with to be able to sustain yourself potentially from a longer perspective. And so we'll touch on some of those in other videos, but those are things to consider when it comes to that 3 week time frame. Okay guys, so thanks for sticking with me thus far. I've got some bonus things I want to make sure that we're aware of as we consider things to put into our 72-hour kit, bug out bag, and so forth. We touched on the philosophy of 3 areas, the 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, and 3 weeks. But now I want to touch on a couple key tools and or other things that from a comfort perspective that we want to also consider. Because without some of these things, it's going to make surviving or some of those scenarios a little more difficult. First and foremost, I can't ever go without saying that I would always carry some type of a sheath knife or a full tang knife. And we'll touch on what that really means as we'll get into future videos on knives and options for carrying knives. But I always have some type of a camp knife or a full sheath knife to be able to use for processing wood or be able to even use it from a protection in that perspective. Now I always also have several different options for more of just pocket knives, your folder knives, and we'll touch on those. One of the other ones that I would always encourage to have in your bag is some type of a multi-tool. It's going to give you pliers, it's going to give you a pocket knife, it's going to give you several things. And so again, multi-tools is one of those things that I would encourage to have some type of a multi-tool within your bug out bag and kit. Some way to be able to navigate if needed. Okay, so I would encourage you to think about getting some of your local maps so that you can traverse your city or area based on needed, and then some type of a compass to be able to navigate as well. Okay, so communication and navigation is something that's also important as well. Some of the other things to consider now with all the different devices we have today, I also always have some type of a battery pack that allows me to recharge my phone and my flashlights, other devices. So speaking of which, flashlights, I always have some type of a flashlight. So I've been carrying more of just kind of a headlamp that requires AAA batteries, and recently picked up this little micro lamp, and I'm going to do some reviews on this and look at this lamp to be able to replace that one, because now I've started to look at, there's lots of options on the market for more of your smaller rechargeable type of headlamps, which again goes to why I carry a battery backup, because with that battery backup and or some other options like this solar panel back here. So the solar panel back here, that solar panel allows me to be able to recharge some of my devices as well. So we'll get into some of those on future videos as we look at some of the gear and dive into a little bit more detail on some of those. Okay, but having some type of a light option for my headlamp, flashlight, and I always carry some type of a small everyday carry or EDC light in my pocket usually as well. So those are some core tools that I always want to make sure I have in my bag. Okay, pocket knife, flashlight, multi-tool, things like that, some way to be able to recharge my things. And then last but not least, of course, is some of those other comfort items. I always want to have some type of a toiletry bag. Okay, I always have some extra toilet paper for one thing, But then I also carry, this is just kind of an old bag that I had for some of my kids' soccer stuff, and I use it as my toiletry bag. And this is gonna be things like emergency, like little toothbrushes or flossers. I may carry some things like dude wipes, which are going to give me some wet wipes and things to be able to use for different things. I've got some contacts in there, so if I don't want to have my glasses or my glasses break, I've got some options for that. So these are things to consider as more of a comfort item, but also a necessity in some cases, because again, some of those comfort items can be key to be able to allowing you to survive from a mental perspective. Just some of those comfort things mentally allow us to be able to go longer and do things a little bit easier when it comes to that perspective. So now, and again, depending on your scenario, right? As I'm now in the situation where I've got more of my daughters and things and my wife with me, one of the things I always try to have handy is some of those feminine type of products as well. And that's just something, again, based on your family and your scenario, that you've got to consider. What is it that you may want to have available to you? In my kit, I'll just carry what I need for me. I may have some backups depending on the situation, but in my daughter's kits, I'll put their particular things. In my wife's kit, I may put things specific to my wife. So those are ideas and things that I carry within my kits, okay? Now, one of the things, last things I'll mention is Dave Canterbury's 10 C's is one of the things I also consider, right? The 10 C's of survival. What are those 10 C's when it comes to some key things? And I'm not gonna dive into it in this particular video, but I'll touch on it some other videos around what are those 10 C's of survival, and when it comes to taking a cutting tool or candle lights, those kind of things. But that's one thing to look up, and again, you may be able to go look at some of those ideas from Dave Canterbury's 10 C's of survival as well. All right, guys, thanks again for joining us for this video. Hopefully, as I went through some of the content of what I carry in my bug out bag and 72-hour kit, it provided you with some ideas to consider as you start preparing your kit. Now, as I said before, there's no perfect gear or bag for everybody, but it's going to be based on your scenario and your particular environment. These are just ideas. I'll put links to some of these things down below, and there's also other things that I'll include that I didn't show in this particular video, but really just to give you some ideas of what you want to consider. Thank you again. Please, if this added value, hit that thumbs up, that like, and subscribe button. Feel free to add comments below if you have further questions or you want to see reviews on some of the gear, or if you've got things that you particularly include in your bag and want to consider. I love learning from that community as you guys add those comments and information. I always enjoy that learning as well. So thank you again for joining us. And on the next video, I'm going to jump a little bit further into the water purification options around tools and things that we shared here, from the filters and or other capabilities. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to having you join us on future and upcoming videos.